Hey folks, good to see you all. We are in London, we're in southeast London, and we're in Greenwich. So lovely to see you all. I needed to show these clouds. There's a blues musician playing nearby. I want to say hello. Hey folks, so the area we started in Greenwich, the signal dips, it jumps around. Hello to everyone. But we're going to have a little walk around and talk about the life of Mr. Daniel Day-Lewis. The first thing we're going to show you is the Greenwich Foot Tunnel. It will gradually get better on the way around. So we're on the south bank, south side of the river. Greenwich Foot Tunnel is here since the early 1900s. Opened in 1902, designed by a man named Alexander Binney for the then London County Council. So we're on the South Bank, and it was built really to replace a ferry system for workers to reach the docks on the other side. So it's situated, the entire tunnel, beneath the River Thames and connects this entire area, which is called the Cutty Sark Gardens. Hey Sandy, good to see you. This is the Cutty Sark Gardens. And the tunnel's a listed building. I'm going to show you a picture of it now. A few pictures I'm going to show you on the way. This is the tunnel underneath us. So the other side is what we call the Isle of Dogs. Diane has walked through this in the 70s. It was quite an unreliable ferry service. And there were people working in the shipyards on the other side of the river, and they decided to build a foot tunnel. Alexander Binney, the then London County Council, now the Greater London Council, or the Mayor of London, controls all of this. That's where we're starting, but we're talking about the life of a man named Daniel Day-Lewis. But we have to start here. The Fan Museum, Noreen, is right next to where we're ending. The Fan Museum is next to the house of Cecil Day-Lewis, the father of Daniel Day-Lewis. And here we have the Cutty Sark. And I need to walk back a bit. It's a tea clipper. Built in 1869, it was one of the last of its kind to be built, and one of the fastest. This is before steam took over. It was long, it was narrow. The reason they were called clippers is they simply clipped through the water. They were long, they were narrow, they just cut through the waves. Cutty Sark is a Scotch in the US. Yeah, I know the Cutty Sark Scotch whiskey. Now, most of this is authentic. But there was quite a bad fire here a few years back. Visited 16 different countries, the equivalent of travelling to the moon and back 2.5 times. And the name, Cutty Sark, some people say, well, why is it called Cutty Sark? Cutty Sark is a short nightdress, and it was used most famously in the poem Tam O'Shanter by Robert Burns. Only supposed to last about 30 years, ended up lasting 52, and it was built as a tea clipper for the tea trade. They say it transported 10 million pounds of tea between the 1870s, about 1871, 72, and 1877. Then you had the invention and the building of the Suez Canal. And it ended its trade, its tea trade. Still carried coal for a while, and then Australian wool. They have evidence that over 600 men worked on this ship in its history. But we're here to talk about Daniel Day-Lewis. Does one deck have a red floor? It does. It's still a great museum. But the reason we're in this area, simply because Daniel Day-Lewis, great actor, maybe the greatest film actor we've ever had, born in Kennington, but lived in this area for many years. As we move along, hey Leslie. Good to see you all. Daniel Michael Blake Day-Lewis is his name. Born in Kennington, not too far from here, a couple of miles away, 29th of April, 1957. The second child of an actress, Jill Balcon, and a poet laureate, one of the most famous poets of the day, Cecil Day-Lewis. One sister, Tamsin. We do, Noreen. So many great actors. The age of 2, they moved from Kennington here. This is the Gypsy Moth pub. There's been a pub on this site named the Wheat Sheaf since the 1700s, and it was named the Gypsy Moth not too long ago because of a man named Francis Chichester, who in the 1960s sailed in his 60s single-handedly around the world. As far as I know, there are only 2 people knighted, made sirs in their workplace. One was a man named Frank Benson, and he was an actor at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. And he was knighted straight off the stage after he played Mark Antony, Julius Caesar, knighted by the king in a royal room in Drury Lane. And the other person was not too far from here, on the river. The Gypsy Moth was the name of the boat that Francis Chichester sailed in the 1960s, and the Queen stepped onto the boat and made him a knight in his workplace. So as far as I know, only 2 people have ever been knighted in their places of work, as it were. The pub itself has been here since the 1700s. Get a better view of the Cutty Sark. So there was a fire here about 8 years ago. The idea of a clipper had many sails. Let's try and see if we can get a photo of what a clipper looked like, the amount of sails that these ships would have. And Francis Chichester was trying to beat, in the 1960s, the speed of these clippers. About 80 on board, Helen. They have evidence of about 650 sailors that, over the years, sailed or worked, really. They weren't sailing. He didn't do it as a pastime. He did it as hard work. So at the age of 2, young Daniel lived in this area, went to local schools. Apparently he was quite a naughty child. When he was 11, he went to a boarding school in Sevenoaks, again, not too far from here. And he was introduced to 3 of his interests, which stayed with him for many years: fishing, woodwork, and acting. When he was 14 years old, he was used as an extra in a film, Sunday Bloody Sunday. The casting directors simply arrived at the school and they said, "Do you have anyone that might fit the bill?" And they went through the classrooms, and at 14, he was paid £2 basically to vandalise cars, and he said it was one of the best jobs he ever had. And in 1972, he was 15, and his father passed away. Quite a few of these tours that I do, the world of Laurence Olivier, the world of Agatha Christie, Arthur Conan Doyle, I talk about quite a lot. They seem to lose their parents, or one of them, between the ages of about 11 and 15. And it seemed, again with Daniel, to shape his teenage years. It seems that he wanted to be a cabinet maker. He was so into woodwork, and he applied to be an apprentice. But he was turned down because he didn't have the experience. So he put more of his efforts at school and at college into acting. Arson was suspected, Sandy. They've never found out. So Daniel went to the National Youth Theatre. Then he was accepted at a very prestigious school, the Bristol Old Vic, where he ended up training for 3 years. As far as I know, Sandy, it was pancreatic cancer. He wasn't very young, maybe late 60s, as far as I know. So we're in the centre of Greenwich here. We're approaching a church named St. Alphege. You can see the top of it just poking out. All the buildings on the left-hand side are part of Greenwich Market. So the external bits that we see, just regular cafes, but the market itself is in the middle. We're going to approach the church and see a tiny bit of the market, but the signal dies as we go in, so won't spend too much time in there. Greenwich Market itself opened in 1736. It only had 60 stallholders. Over half of them were butchers. There was only one grocer, one baker, one hatter. And the land was owned by Greenwich Hospital. So that's who they paid their money to. The 1950s and 60s, especially the late 60s, places like Covent Garden Market and Greenwich Market, they went into decline, and now they're busy again, mainly because of street food and also as a craft market. Took a brief walk in, but the signal will go. Now, Daniel himself, when he graduated, he got into a few small theatre roles, a few small parts in TV, had a small part in Gandhi. Then in 1982, he had quite a big break in theatre. He took over the lead role in a play called Another Country, which was on in the West End, written by Julian Mitchell. And he gradually just started to work, mainly in movies. Got a great part in The Bounty in 1984 as the first mate to Anthony Hopkins. One of my favourite films. 1985, My Beautiful Laundrette. But still, he thought his career was in theatre. But he was just getting more and more movie roles. And here's the market, 1797. Sandy has said, let's stop for ice cream. I wish. Got too much to try and remember on this tour. So 1737, the market opened. Mainly crafts, mainly small stalls. I've mentioned on these tours before, the first regular shops in London were for books and paper, printing equipment. And they called those shops stationary shops because they didn't move. And it's where we get the word stationary from. Some clothing, it's all a covered market. So Daniel, as a young lad, he would have hung around this market. This was his playground, as he always said years later. As he grew up, went to theatre school, wanted to be a theatre actor, and ended up getting more film roles. Room with a View in 1985, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, 1987. And then everything changed when he got the role of Christy Brown. Christy Brown was an Irish painter and writer. He was only able to write and paint with the toes on his left foot. And the film, which was called My Left Foot in 1989, it won Daniel an Oscar. Amazing acting. 1989, he returned to the stage. Richard Eyre directed a production of Hamlet at the National Theatre. And for whatever reason, he collapsed during the first ghost scene a few days in with his father's ghost, Hamlet's father's ghost. He left the stage and he was replaced by an understudy named Jeremy Northam. If you've ever seen the film Emma, Gwyneth Paltrow, Jeremy Northam's one of the leads in that. So that was kind of his big break. But Daniel Day-Lewis, from then on, 1989 to now, never returned to the stage. And people have said years later that he saw the ghost of his father. And he kind of said this at the beginning, in the early 90s. He said he seemed to see the ghost of his father, but years later he said it was a metaphor, that he felt that his father was with him on stage. Daniel Day-Lewis is known as what we would now call a method actor, and he was trying to live the part, so it brought it back to him. And he thought, I don't want to do theatre again. Too many people relying on me. The rehearsals, the performances, he didn't want to let people down. The idea of method acting. Well, Daniel, he never gives interviews, really, not too long interviews in this day and age. And when he did, when he spoke about acting, it seems he was what we would now call a method actor. And method acting was, and is still, people still followed this preparation technique. It's a style of research, preparation and performance Originally, it was based on Konstantin Stanislavski's system of acting. In the early 1900s, Stanislavski co-founded the Moscow Art Theatre, worked on a lot of Shakespeare, a lot of Chekhov, and he had this system. It was an approach to acting. He called it cultivating the art of representation or experience. What it was designed to do was simply to utilize normal thought, our own emotional experiences, and then use them to kind of activate behavior that we might not, as regular people, actually have. Simply put, I suppose, use your own experiences, remember them, work on them, and latch them onto whatever scenes or characters you're playing. I suppose that's what acting's about. Simply imagining you're somebody else. Some people can do it quite easily. Anthony Hopkins can read a script. He reads it hundreds of times. That's his preparation. And he imagines every available scenario. Doesn't like rehearsal, Anthony Hopkins. But he says he will read the script and know every single avenue that his character could take. Laurence Olivier always said that he worked from the outside in. He found the right costume, the right feel, what he was wearing. The great actor Jeremy Irons, when he played twins in Reversal of Fortune, 1990, one was evil and one was okay. One was not a bad twin. And he said the simple way of doing it when he was filming, for the evil twin, he used a pair of shoes a size smaller, and then he felt a bit more uptight. St. Alphege Church. Just need to concentrate on this church. Most of it is designed by Nicholas Hawksmoor. Anthony Hopkins is Welsh. He's a Welsh actor, so UK. This is an Anglican church, was here in the 1100s. There's been a church on the site since 1290. Henry VIII, by the way, was baptized here in 1491. But it's not the original church. This is designed and rebuilt by Nicholas Hawksmoor. He designed the West Tower at Westminster Abbey. And St. Alphege, Alphege, was the Archbishop of Canterbury. Let's cross over. Now, Greenwich is a beautiful area, not too far from Blackheath, which is a bit further up past all of these cars and buses, but it always seems to be a lot busier. We continued along the road, round to the right there. We'd eventually end up in Bermondsey and Southwark Park. So around to the right, Southwark Park, a couple of miles from here, where the queue for people who want to pay their respects for Her Majesty is now starting. 5 miles from Westminster Hall. Anthony Hopkins, Debs has said, is from the same small town as Richard Burton, and I think Michael Sheen. I'm sure the town is Port Talbot. Debs will tell me if I'm right or not. So this idea of method acting, or the system of acting, Stanislavski invented a system. And there's a difference between a play, which was what Stanislavski was working on, and a screen. In a play, there's an audience, there's an interval, there's a journey to work, there are lights. So Stanislavski's system was simply designed for rehearsal, not performance. So imagine, let's say in the rehearsal, the scene is a family argument, a father and son, a husband or wife. Stanislavski would often get the actors to improvise before the scene. So they would have the argument, and then at a certain point, Stanislavski would click his fingers and they would start doing the lines from the actual scene. So then you trained your brain, your acting mind, so that in performance, you can just jump back into that feeling, knowing that you can turn it on and off. And in film, it's quite different. So Lee Strasberg, Stella Adler, and Stanford Meisner developed in the 1950s in a theatre school in New York method acting, and it was more for film. The problem with film is you have to wait. You often find that you've got hours and hours, if not weeks or months, to work on something. And it can, I suppose, get self-indulgent. With the theatre acting system, Stanislavski's, you can switch it on and off. Sometimes you have weeks when you're in a film. Now, we could spend hours talking about this, but from the 1950s, when people like Carl Malden, Lee J. Cobb, Marlon Brando, James Dean, Jimmy Dean, they were becoming film icons. They improvised on set during the filming. Didn't always stick to the script. They often tried to surprise others in the scenes. They did unrehearsed movements, threw out a different line here and there. And what they were trying to do, subconsciously, I suppose, was get a different response. Do I use method acting? Helen's asked. Well, I suppose in theatre, I've researched a role and I've tried to learn things that the character would live. Maybe try and feel what they feel, but some people take it maybe too far. Pacino and De Niro, they came along. They learnt the crafts and professions to play the characters more easily. But Daniel Day-Lewis, he took it to a different level. He completely lived the character throughout the shoot, even for a few weeks and months, if he wasn't working on it. So he's best known as being a 3-time Oscar winner. Each character he seemed to play, he took time off between them. They were all different from the last. Stayed in character for an entire shoot, even if it meant sometimes staying in isolation for a few months. And some people seem to say, critics mainly, that he must be in agony all the time. It must be torture. But he always said he loved it. And he would often pick the projects completely different to the last, just so that he could enjoy playing another part and living that role. But he would always take a couple of years off to prepare. He seemed to enjoy it anyway. And some other actors felt a bit intimidated, a bit confused at times when he was using their character's name when they were making phone calls rather than the actual actor's name. But almost everyone that worked with him seemed to say it made them a better actor on screen. So after all the work he did, he finally retired. This is what he said, 2017, the 20th of June. And it was just on the eve of his final film, The Phantom Thread, being released. At the age of 60, he said that making films used to mean everything, and lately it doesn't feel that way. And he and his wife, Rebecca, the daughter of Arthur Miller, they live, as they have done for years, in a 50-acre site in County Wicklow. After Hamlet in 1989, it was film only. He felt that he wasn't talented enough. This is what he said. I'm not talented enough to jump in and out of character. I've got to live the character. And in quick succession, for a few years, he made The Last of the Mohicans, In the Name of the Father, The Boxer, The Age of Innocence, which is one of my favourites. And Sandy said, how many years totally did he work in film? So we're talking mid-80s until 2017, and he retired at the age of 60. Then he made The Crucible, and then he took a few years off and made Gangs of New York with Scorsese. Made a very small film that his sister directed named The Ballad of Jack and Rose, one of his least well-known films. In theatre, 5 maximum. After My Left Foot, film took over. There Will Be Blood, he won his second Oscar. He made the musical 9. In 2012, he won his third Oscar for Lincoln. And then a 5-year gap till The Phantom Thread in 2017. He's always said he felt that his life was a lifelong study of evasion. 3 children. He had a 6-year relationship with Isabella Gianni. They had 1 son. In 1996, when working on The Crucible, Arthur Miller's fantastic play, but the screenplay of it, while visiting Miller's house, he met Arthur's daughter, Rebecca. And they've been together since 1996. 2 sons. And they split their time between Ireland, Wicklow, their 50-acre estate, I suppose. He has quite a small Georgian house. Very modest house, but he bought 50 acres of land around it. Just for the privacy. Always had dual citizenship between Ireland and Britain. He's always said that he feels like Southeast London is his home, and this area where this was his playground. But he had to leave London. He wanted to be private, he always said. At the time, the press wanted him to be public. Now we're coming up to the Greenwich Theatre. In the 1960s, this theatre was built. It used to be known as the Rose and Crown Music Hall. There is a pub here which shares the land. The pub itself was an inn, a tavern, built in the reign of Queen Elizabeth, the late 1500s, rebuilt in 1888. Janella said, in the name of the Father starred the excellent Pete Postlethwaite. They were great friends. Pete Postlethwaite is one of the great actors. Again, gone far too young. So many are. Just want to show you the side of the Greenwich Theatre. Any of their children act? I'm not 100% sure, Sandy. His son with Isabel he would be between 25 and 30 now. So he could well do. Hugh said, can I do a tour on Pete at some point? He was from the north of England. I'll have to research where he was from. The town, one of the great actors. Of course, they appeared in The Name of the Father. And Pete Postlethwaite as well was in Last of the Mohicans. So you got the theatre, and then just up here, you can imagine that Daniel went to Greenwich Theatre when he was a young kid. For the 8 or 9 years he lived in this area. The road is called Crooms Hill. If you walked all the way up, you get to Blackheath. But they're showing the Black-Eyed Theatre Company. The Greenwich Theatre got this opening in a few days. Sherlock Holmes and the Valley of Fear. It's only on from Wednesday through Saturday next week. I might try and get to see this. I don't live too far from here. The theatre itself is very small. It was a music hall. Only holds 421. Opened in the 1960s. So he would have gone here to see plays. 1991. So years after Daniel lived in this area, this place opened. It's known as the Fan Museum. When Charles II took over the country, was restored to the throne in 1660, Restoration comedy, Restoration theatre was very fashionable, and there were actors' handbooks. And the use of the fan in theatre. People had so many different fans from all over the world, and there were gestures that you could use with fans that meant something on stage, and there were handbooks that you could read to learn those gestures as a performer. It's literally, Sandy, a museum of fans. Diana said, Pete's from Warrington. Might have to get up there. It's the only recognised major fan museum in the world. But these are Georgian buildings. Buildings themselves are from the 1720s, this entire block. It has a collection of over 5,000 fans. The poet laureate Cecil Day-Lewis, his wife Jill Balkan, their son Daniel, and their daughter Tamsin live just here. Cecil Day-Lewis, poet laureate, lived here from 1957 to 1972. So those early years, the young Daniel, he always said years later, this was his playground. And that's why I decided to take us here. I don't really know how far I can go in. private land. Diana's lost sound. The Bristol Old Vic Theatre School. It's like the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. It's a theatre school, Sandy. So you train for 1 to 3 years. At the end of it, you get what we now call an equity card. I trained at a school called the Drama Studio London, DSL, and that's how I got my equity card, to give me professional status as an actor. Not that it gets me any work. But at least I can say it. So this is where they live. This is where Daniel grew up before he went to boarding school not too far from here. We continue on in this direction. We walked for about 10 minutes. We'd end up in Blackheath. Georgian buildings, 1720s, most of these. It's a big house. I'd say 5 bedrooms. Let's cross the road so we can see it properly. You've seen the plaque. Sandy has said the acting I've done from my home was magnificent. Oh, Sandy, you're my favourite now. I do ghost stories and plays from home. Look at this. Isn't this lovely? Janella said, I think much more than that. Yeah, it could well be. Well, I had a little peek in the window earlier. You can't really see it through the screen of the camera, but I literally peeked through their window, and both those first 2 floors literally are enormous reception rooms. So the bedrooms may just be the top 2 floors. Expensive now. Yes, Joyce. From the age of 2 till he was about 14, this was his home. In Greenwich, in southeast London. SE10, southeast 10. Suddenly, everything's gone quieter. Just going to put you back to me. Hello, folks. Behind me is Blackheath. That's where I have left my bike, up in that direction. So I'm going to take a little walk up there and cycle home, probably about 3 miles, not too bad. And it's a lovely, mild evening. As you can see, there's not too many clouds in the sky. I enjoyed your company. Hopefully there was something there for people. I tried to give an introduction to Daniel, a little walk around Greenwich. Hopefully the signal was okay. Thank you, Helen. Thank you so much. What we will do, very, very briefly, show you on Nevada Street some of the architecture here. Thank you, Diane. How to get there on tube? Well, the nearest station is Cutty Sark station. You can also go to Greenwich station itself as well. That's from London Bridge. Sandy said, I missed Agatha Christie. Will I do her again? Without question. It's one of my favourite walks. One of my favourite ever people. We'll try and schedule that for the next couple of weeks. Tomorrow afternoon, at around this time, I'm doing an Alfred Hitchcock walk in Shoreditch. So it's a bit of a journey from here. The idea of Alfred Hitchcock and Daniel Day-Lewis working together well, fills me with dread, really. Daniel, who got into character, and an actor's director would like to work with Daniel, but Alfred Hitchcock was more about actors like cattle. He actually said that, Alfred Hitchcock. But actors were like cattle, and he was questioned. What about James Stewart? What about Ingrid Bergman, Cary Grant? And he said, well, some of them are nice cattle. Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Hugh. You've got King William. And here is Greenwich Park. Thank you, Kathy. I hope it doesn't rain, Janelle. The last time I did Alfred Hitchcock, it was pouring with rain. But it was so much fun. So this is Greenwich Park in front of us. The statue is King William IV. You've got the old Queen's House and the Maritime Museum in the distance. They definitely do ice cream in the park, Susan. I just walked beyond the gates. Of course, this is a royal park, like Hyde Park and Regent's Park. So these were closed. They're now reopened. It's very quiet at this time of the afternoon. If I walked up that road there, that little path, I'd be at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. Lots of love. I will see you very soon. Hopefully see you tomorrow for a bit of Alfred Hitchcock talk. If not, join me for a ghost story or a Shakespeare walk or a theatre walk. Thank you for all of your contributions, no matter what. Words, money, anything. If you want to know what else I'm doing, just go to my page and just click on follow, and it will send you random messages. The world of H.G. Wells is coming up. The world of Lord Byron. The world of George Orwell, all in different parts of London. Thank you, Tish. Great clouds. It's like a summer's day, but it's very chilly. I'll see you very soon. Take care. Lots of love.